My name is Regina Wiseman, Director of the Intergovernmental Relations Branch, and we're here today to discuss specifically French immersion and FSL teacher recruitment and retention. So during today's conversation, we will cover the following items. First, I will provide an overview of discussions from our last session held on June 17th of this year. I will then identify the priorities we identified to move forward, and then we will break into groups to further discuss the next Alberta TRR proposals. First, as I mentioned, I would like to provide an overview of our previous discussions. On June 17th, we reviewed the priorities that were previously discussed back in 2018 when we held our first stakeholder conversation on this issue. At that time, the priorities that were identified included international recruitment, homegrown teachers, increased training spaces, communities of practice, and supply and demand. At that time, we also watched videos outlining previously approved TRR projects. And I will note that those videos can be found on our OLEP website under the Funded Activities webpage. We also discussed how teacher retention and recruitment in Alberta has changed since 2018. As we all know, the pandemic came in and caused significant changes in a number of areas, including this area. And because of that, our priorities have changed and they look a little different moving forward. So moving forward, those priorities that we discussed back in June include homegrown teachers, which is a continuation, support for rural and remote regions, which is new, re-entry after disruption due to the pandemic, which is also new, language proficiency of teachers is also new, communities of practice and/or mentorship between new and experienced teachers, and the promotion of the teaching professions to young Albertans, which is related but a little bit different than the homegrown teachers. So just a reminder of some of the projects which were previously approved and are currently underway throughout Alberta. The first is Campus Saint-Jean's project, which is aiming to increase training spaces, growing capacity to meet demand. So the aim of this project is to create satellite campuses in Grande Prairie, Red Deer, and Calgary into 2024. So far, Campus Saint-Jean has been successful in creating satellite campuses in Grande Prairie and Calgary, and the project is continuing. So this will impact the former priority of increased training spaces. Another project occurring at Campus Saint-Jean is the Enhancing the Education program at Campus Saint-Jean. The aim is to improve education program courses to make them more practical and better aligned with the TQS. In the end, they want to better support students in the Bachelor of Education and after degree program. This will impact the language proficiency of new teachers. Another project, which is currently underway, is occurring within the FCSFA, and it is titled Teacher Recruitment and Retention for Minority Language Education in Alberta. The aim is to promote francophone education and to recruit teachers. To retain teachers, the project also seeks to create work environments that foster cooperation in the profession, including a strong mentoring program and effective leadership support for beginning teachers. The Edmonton Public Schools has completed their Teaching as a Career Pathway Toolkit. A website, beafrenchteacher.ca, and toolkit encourages French-speaking junior high, high school, and post-secondary students to choose teaching, French immersion, or FSL as a career path were created. Although the toolkit is complete, promotion around this resource is ongoing. Another project is occurring within the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary, and this project is entitled Teacher Retention and Recruitment in French Immersion and FSL. The aim of this project is data collection to better understand, monitor, and report on the state of teachers' recruitment and retention in Alberta. It is also meant to provide additional graduate and undergraduate courses in French to future teachers and to current teachers in the field. This, we hope, will have a positive impact on the former priority of supply and demand. And finally, but definitely not least, is another project underway within the Edmonton Public Schools. It's the development and adaptation of re-entry resources for French immersion and FSL program. The goal is to develop and adapt new digital and print teaching and learning resources for teachers and parents to support them in either a face-to-face or synchronous online delivery context. Packages are available free at the epsbresources.selfie.store. And I think that we can probably provide a link to that in the chat, Amy, if you don't mind. So these are the projects that are approved within Alberta. However, we understand that there are also projects occurring in other provinces and territories and within other organizations across the country. Other projects that we have become aware of include CASALT's project entitled Identifying Requirements and Gaps in French as a Second Language Teacher Education, Recommendations and Guidelines. This project aims to identify ways to better equip new FSL teachers for success in the early stages of their careers. We are also aware that ACPE and CASALT have recently released a report on French immersion and FSL teacher shortages across the country. The Ontario Public School Boards Associations has an initiative entitled Meeting Labor Market Needs for French as a Second Language Instruction in Ontario, which lead into 3 subsequent initiatives as part of the FSL TRR strategy. The initiatives aim to develop a guide for English language school boards that supports the effective recruitment and hiring of FSL teachers, to explore existing research on the assessment of second language proficiency in teaching contexts, and to recognize the important role of school administrators in facilitating FSL teacher retention and professional support. Can these projects help to inform us at a provincial level? This now brings us to the purpose of today's conversation. We have recently received a call for proposal from Canadian Heritage regarding new teacher recruitment and retention initiatives. In 21-22, $15.2 million of federal funding is set aside to support strategies for recruiting and retaining teachers. Half of that sum is for minority French language schools and half is for teachers of French immersion and second language programs. In 2022-23, that total sum increases to $17 million, again with an equal split between FFL and FSL. Furthermore, in the 2021 federal budget, the federal government committed to $180.4 million over 3 years, starting this fiscal, which will go to support FSL students across the country in achieving higher levels of bilingualism. Although at this point, we do not know how much of that money will be given to Alberta and what portion of it will be specifically designated to TRR projects. Those are some of the ongoing conversations that we are having with the federal government at this time. Applications may be submitted for projects beginning in either 2022-23 or 2023-24. For projects beginning in 2022-23, a multi-year funding application may be submitted for a maximum of 2 years. For projects beginning in 2023-24, a 1-year funding application may be submitted. The federal contribution will cover up to 50% of total expenses of the project. Project applicants will need to contribute the remaining 50%. So eligible projects should meet Alberta's priority areas set out in previous discussions. Some priority areas that could be further addressed are the support for rural and remote regions, the language proficiency of teachers, communities of practice and or mentorship, and additional support for reentry. Eligible projects must also meet the criteria set out in the federal application guide. The federal government's priorities for 2022-23 include projects seeking to improve the capacity to understand, monitor, and report on the state of teacher recruitment and retention, as well as the implementation of planning or data establishment projects that were supported in 2020-2021. Priority will also be given to larger scope projects, such as national or province-wide projects. Projects whose expected results, performance indicators, and targets include or are in line with the examples of expected results, performance indicators, and targets will be prioritized. Applications must be complete and school authorities must have the availability of funds to equally match the federal contributions. Now, I understand that was a lot of information, and we are here in my branch to help support any school authority, or grouping of school authorities who want to put forward an application. So we are now going to break into groups to discuss the following questions. What are school authorities already doing that target these priority areas? Are there ways to build upon these initiatives or upon PCH-approved TRR projects already underway or complete? Are there projects being complicated already for this call for proposals that may benefit from having other school authorities involved? What is the potential for a provincial approach? So for these discussions, we are going to use Jamboard, and Amy will provide you with the link once we are into our groups. I understand that there were some excellent conversations in regards to these questions. So I will first open it up to group 1.
I'll try to group our points together, but we had Corrine from Grand Prairie, and then 2 of us from Sherwood Park, Elk Island Public Schools, and a member from Edmonton. And very similar either concerns or approaches. We talked about working with the human resources and expediting probationary contracts for French immersion teachers. We also talked about how we won't compromise on the standards and the TQS, but there is a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to giving contracts or probationary contracts. Attending job fairs, both locally and Karina talked about traveling out of province as well to job fairs, searching for teachers. Having a good relationship with the campus Saint Jean is so important, and we do take on, with Elk Island Public Schools, we take on quite a few stagiaires and have a good student-teacher relationship. And we're actually in a quite interesting, unique situation where we see students that graduate from our French immersion program go full cycle and come back either as student teachers or end up coming back as teachers as well. We talked about one of the challenges was having some of the larger school divisions. They have the ability to pre-hire teachers or to hire teachers in advance of actually having a position, whereas none of us in our group were able to actually hire. We have to hire 4 positions, not hire a pool of French language teachers and then pick from that pool. So that, I think, puts a lot of us in a difficult position when it comes time for our hiring cycles. We talked about some potential projects. One other thing was the idea was brought up to make sure that your website, your divisional website, actually has as visible as possible some information that would actually attract people and say, hey, we have French language instruction in our division. We are looking for people who speak French as teachers. And some potential projects is possibly showcasing local francophone culture in your area. Some teachers might not realize that locally there's potentially quite a vibrant francophone community, and there's already activities going on. So if you are trying to attract francophone teachers, let them know we have some culture already here. Mentorship for teachers, access to resources. I think all of us know that access to resources is either costly or it's sort of difficult or it's all over the place. Most of us probably come from divisions where the majority of our students are educated in English. I know we do have some people from francophone boards as well, but those of us that have the English component as well, a lot of our key divisional documents, including resources, are in English and exams are in English. And we talked about that translation piece. And our experience, we actually had an interesting experience. We sent key exams to a translator and we received them back. And it was sort of done with good intentions, but our supports for students, they sent it to a company that translated it very well, but they didn't really keep the educational piece in mind, and they didn't keep the French language ability of our immersion students in mind. So the translations came back and they weren't particularly necessarily useful for all grades. But then we did talk about how the campus Saint Jean, work with them. If you're looking at translating, work with the campus Saint Jean and see if they have either students or they have some recommendations of ways to get documents translated. And then professional learning. Another project idea would be invest in professional learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Any comments or questions on any of the points raised by Kyle? Okay, let's move on to room 3. Monique, Nicole, I apologize, I think it's Sigrid, and Stephanie. Who was the lead in your group?
we touched on a lot of those same points. So, you know, talking about mentorship and resourcing and coaching and all of those kinds of things. We did drill down a little bit on the mentorship piece, because that is something that we're thinking at Edmonton Public Schools of partnering with Consult to, like, they have a mentorship program that they developed with the teacher recruitment retention project, and we're looking at how we can partner with them to not just promote it, but sort of move that forward and you know, make it a little bit bigger and things for language teachers. And then we also talked about how building on previous projects is a priority. And so we're looking at building on that Be a French Teacher website, and how can we, you know, partner with other people to promote that and create some resources so that teachers can use the website with their students, and, you know, actually have something to go do with the website instead of, you know, just here's a link, and making sure that those kinds of initiatives just don't die, because there's some great content there.
At the very start, we were quite excited, the two of us. I'm from the Lethbridge area, and we have rural and urban schools. And Debbie is from Canadian Rockies, and so we were excited to see the support for rural and remote sites being one of the new priority areas, and also the language proficiency of teachers. So that was something that obviously piqued our interest. We spoke about the fact that a lot of the teachers that we currently have are expressing an interest in improving their French. Many of them have been teaching for a long time, and they are from the French immersion program and feel that they could improve their French to provide a stronger, to deliver a stronger program. So that was quite interesting. I guess I could speak to what the other two teams had mentioned about teacher mentor programs. When we try to recruit any teachers, especially at French immersion sites, we tend to, and now the administrators agree, add French proficiency as an asset, even if it has nothing to do with French program, just to get French out there, and obviously to try to recruit as many strong French speakers as possible who can deliver and who are flexible and can move from program to program in a dual track school. Let me see, what else did we talk about? One thing that came to mind was the importance of perhaps assisting or finding funding for professional learning communities would be definitely to our advantage to offer that to our current teaching staff. We have a waxing and a waning need for teachers, especially, and when I speak to that, I'm talking about rural school divisions. We don't always need to recruit more, but what we do need is to provide excellent French speakers and French teachers to our communities. And so I really do believe that working on language proficiency of teachers would be greatly advantageous. Now, there was one question about what are we already doing? And we are one of those school divisions who was approached by the OPSPA, the Ontario Public School Board Association, to initiate a project. And so we have a very minor project. And this project is basically focused around supporting FSL administrators, so immersion and basic French administrators, so that they can in turn better support and retain and recruit quality French educators. And it's, like I said, it's minor, but I see how this new initiative could piggyback on such a very small and minor project. We're currently doing things such as talking about our francophone and French supports in the community, as one of our members had just mentioned. You know, yes, we have La Cité des Prairies down here. We have Cinémagine. We have a French library. These things are sometimes hidden in plain view to non-French speaking administrators. And so they can't provide that to their school populations. So small things like that, talking about the Common European Framework of Reference is also on our list of things that we're doing, advantages of speaking and learning and teaching French in our communities. All of these things kind of go hand in hand. And so it would be really nice to see, see some funding initiatives that could be more sustainable, let's say, than a small $4,000 to provide a couple of webinars and maybe one resource per school for an entire division. I think I have said it all. One thing I did want to mention was, I wonder what the possibility of teacher exchanges would be. And I'm not talking about out of Canada, but if there could be some funding put toward a partnership with Quebec or French-speaking areas in Canada to pique teachers' interest in a higher language proficiency, or perhaps looking into ways in which Explore for adults, which has been offered for decades and decades, could be maybe more in plain view and more accessible to our teachers in the summer months. Maybe if we focused or highlighted that, then teachers would feel compelled to work on their language proficiency. I think that's everything.
Some excellent ideas. Thank you. And I know that there are some teacher exchange programs. We have an international education services branch within education, but I think they focus primarily on exchanges in other countries. But definitely a very interesting idea for, let's see our own backyard. Let's see how we can support each other in Canada. So excellent idea. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to see if anyone from room 1.
Certainly, we can echo a lot of what's already been shared. One conversation we had was really around rural school boards and the retention of teachers to those rural areas. We had some conversation about programs that exist in other provinces, I think in Quebec, where incentives are provided to teachers based on the number of years that they retain in a rural setting. The idea being that it gives an opportunity to set down some roots. So encourage that retention, certainly in a rural area. We did have some conversation also about projects that are currently undergoing, at least in Edmonton Public, with the development of teaching and learning materials to support teachers in a return from pandemic, but also in a fluctuating teaching environment where we see transition from classroom to online and back and forth as quarantines take place, etc. So providing those resources to teachers, simply to make their days easier in their very challenging current work scenario. So we had some conversation about that as well. We did maybe get a little off topic and talk a little bit about timelines and submitting proposals. And one of the things that I think we all experience is the difference in fiscal years and the difference in school years, and when you start projects and the timelines that are attached to that. So working within a school year context versus a government fiscal year sometimes has some challenges there too, and takes a little bit of foresight and planning. And even we're looking at that when submitting the proposals now, even trying to identify what day you start your work. Working within the guidelines of the proposals, but then also working within your fiscal or your school year, depending on the context. So probably not a lot of new information there. I think I heard a lot of good conversation from the other groups, but yeah, I don't know, Kelly, Alexandra, was there anything you wanted to add there? We didn't really identify a lead.
I think you mentioned the main ideas, Andrea.
Super.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, so much. So before we move into our next breakout room, are there any comments, questions anyone has for any of the other groups or any of the points that were raised? Okay. Then now we're going to move into another breakout room. We're going to shift our thinking just a little bit. But a few questions for you to discuss. If Alberta were to have a one-stop shop for Francophone and French language teacher recruitment and retention, what components would it need to increase supply and reduce demand for Francophone and French language teachers? Should it include data on Francophone and FSL teachers across the province? Would a provincial map showing supply and demand of FSL teachers be beneficial? What about an outline of steps required to be a Francophone or French language teacher in Alberta?
Really interesting to frame it as a one-stop shop. We had a really rich conversation in this, but it took us in all directions, so please bear with us. I guess, what components would it need to increase supply and reduce demand? This needs to start before university. It's something that we had discussed. We feel that the retention in high school, which often wanes, has a great effect on post-secondary. And what is happening in my experience, and I'll let my group members chime in too after if I miss anything. What we find is that students might not be fully engaged during their years in French immersion near the end, especially with everything going on, but then later on end up choosing French as a way to teach. It's often the easiest program to find a job in, because we're clearly always looking for French teachers, and sometimes the quality can lack, especially in our rural areas. To offer some sort of traveling grad or a French major, which wouldn't be difficult for the cities, but it would be definitely more difficult for rural areas, to have a U of L grad or U of L student who is a grad from one of our high schools in town say, you know, you really need to focus if you would like to become a French teacher. These are the great benefits of becoming a French teacher, but this is something I wish I had done when I was in the younger years. I think Kelly had mentioned, yes, starting in grade 7 and 8, even talking to these students about how great it is to become a French educator in one of our programs, and what that means for Canada. We went on to discuss including data on Francophone and FSL teachers, and Alexandre, who used to travel around from school to school, brought in his perspective from outside of the province and said this would be great for teachers, Canadian Francophone teachers who would be out of the province, perhaps, to see where the demand lies for teachers. You know, if perhaps there's a great demand in rural areas, that would be highlighted, and maybe if it were on a national platform on a website, then we might be able to recruit in an easier way that way. Let me see, what else have we got here? The central shop for professional development opportunities. We feel like we do have the consortia, and more and more, perhaps the silver lining to the pandemic is that we are able to access webinars and different online workshops, which has been really great. So I don't know if I don't know where that is. For us, I feel like we need more school level based professional development, and that needs to be highlighted, because oftentimes when you're in dual track school divisions and rural school divisions, the other, the non-French portion of the PD takes precedence over everything. And oftentimes the French has to be an add-on, and it's not a central focus and a central priority for the school division to offer. The discussion board is a great idea, but we thought, who is going to maintain that? And would there be somebody to network and connect if there were questions that came and that were pinpointed to say, hey, you know, what about this program in Lethbridge, or what about this program up in Grand Prairie, etc. And what about an outline of steps? Kelly, did you want to speak to that? I think that was the last thing that we were talking about, or am I right?
Yes, I think it's a great idea to have it set out that this is what you need to do in order to have a career as a French language teacher or a teacher in the francophone schools. Like I said, it would be helpful then if we had little videos of somebody who actually went through the process and was successful, and the barriers that they've encountered and the challenges, but also how the support that they've received. Thanks, Wendy.
That's great, thanks. And I'm just want to put one more word out there about DELF. I think that having the DELF be something that our students know about and do access regularly is important. And I know that some boards are good at that and some boards don't have access to it. And I think that more and more we need our school administrators to understand that our French teachers need a certified level of French. It might seem, well, like, of course, well, the Campus Saint-Jean, people have the B2 or the C1 when they're graduating, but that's not necessarily a topic of discussion when you're in a principal's office having an interview, perhaps. So that's a little more leadership in that side would be so beneficial to our retention of a quality French teaching staff.
Wendy, can I ask a question really quickly?
Of course.
Okay, do you happen to know if all French graduates take the DELF examination from the Campus Saint-Jean, or is that optional for them?
I did believe that, well, in the past, they had to have the B2, and it had to be, I think, 78%, but it would be really good. Maybe we could talk to Martine Cavana if she's still working there. This used to be the case, from what I understood. Right. I know that for the U of L, for example, it's never been the case that it's required.
Right, and I was just wondering, because I participated for our board in teacher interviews last year, and as I think back, I'm not sure I saw that on every CV, but then people take a lot of different routes too, for example. So they may do a BA at the Campus Saint-Jean, but then go back to a different university in their hometown and do their B.Ed after degree. Mm-hmm. And then it's not part of that conversation. So we just need to recognize that not all French immersion teachers do 100% of their education at the Campus Saint-Jean, right? Especially if they can do a B.Ed in their local communities and not pay for housing or whatever it may be. So it's maybe something we could put on a table for a discussion in the future.
Absolutely. And I think that what's really important to note is that the DELF is available in many of our regions, and it's not necessarily linked to their faculty of ed. And so even a recommendation would be very helpful, because I believe that we need some sort of standard, and that can be difficult to acquire. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nicole. Okay, and I'm done unless anyone else would.
I just wanted to say with the DELF, what we find as well is it's not even so much the diploma, but how the DELF changes teacher practice. Like when you've seen a DELF Prim, for example, or like those A2 tests, when you're wondering what does like authentic reading and writing at an A2 level look like, there's your answer. Like, here's how you can teach FSL 7 to 8, 4 to 9, you know what I mean? And so we're looking at really not just thinking about the DELF as, oh, here's the carrot at the end of FSL 30 or FLA 30, you get to take this high stakes test that gives you this diploma, but like, how can we get the elementary and the junior high teachers to be involved with DELF so that it's changing what they're doing in the classroom? Because the teachers that do the DELF with their students and the teachers that are trained as assessors, like you go into those classrooms and it's a marked difference, like completely different than other classrooms.
That's an excellent point, Stephanie. Thanks so much for bringing that up, because for us it's a game changer. You're shifting to an action-oriented approach of teaching, and kids actually understand the meaning of why they're actually learning to learning a second language, because they're learning to get something, to do something, to accomplish a task. And I think it's just the greatest training for teachers. You're absolutely right.
And I know I can't speak for all post-secondary institutions, but I know that at Campus Saint-Jean, one of their most recent TRR projects enhancing the education program was really putting an emphasis on that language proficiency. I can't recall if they were planning to use the DELF or how they were planning to assess language proficiency, but I know that that was a big component of their recent TRO project. Thank you guys so much. That was great. Okay, let's move on to room 2.
I don't think there's much for us to add, but we had, I'm telling the truth, a lot of those sticky notes are ours, or some of them anyway. So I really think Wendy did a great job of summing up.
I talked about my experience as a new teacher, and I was just so lucky to have ISLI, or languages consultants, in the French Resource Center, and all of this support that was available there. And then we talked about how, we also support other language teachers, and just how that community can be really important. Like, we literally have new teachers that come in and they're crying on our shoulders, and you give them a coffee, you give them a DELF resource, and they come back a lot happier. And we talked about an initiative we did this year, because of cohorting. We have a lot of we had a whole school reach out to us with 6 or 7 elementary teachers who are teaching their own French, like to their homeroom, but these teachers don't speak French. And so trying to deal with that, but then also like affording these principals in these schools a little bit of grace given the times and cohorting and things like that. And so we used some of our OLEP funding to pay for AIM training for these teachers, because it's like that program that will literally tell you what to say. And what's been super interesting is the feedback is these teachers who were not French teachers, they're, teachers who may have 10 years of experience teaching elementary, but have never taught French and maybe took FSL, 10, 20 years ago. And they're emailing us back that they taught their whole class in French and they really loved it. And wow, teaching French is actually really fun. And so we're looking at how can we turn some of these teachers into French teachers, so we can, bring in the Alliance Française to do some linguistic proficiency courses online with them, so we can build up their French a little bit more, bring them in for some PL and things like that, so that we can, build up our base of elementary FSL teachers. And then, that kind of leads to having the Alliance Française give classes for, maybe you might have a French second language teacher who's maybe a B1 that you could bump up to a B2. And now you have a French immersion teacher, and just how building that language proficiency can really benefit the whole French teacher pool as a whole.
I think within our conversation, we kind of summed it up as, if within the province, everybody could have access to something like ISLI within their own, or partnerships within there. That's really, the model of what they have there is really what I think everybody else would love to have. I know that for us, that's for sure something that we would love.
Questions for anything that has been raised? Well, this has been really, really great for me. I know that internally here within Alberta Education, we are taking all of the information that we learn and hear from these sessions. We're having further conversations and doing what we can to move things forward where we can. So please know that this information that we are hearing today, we are doing what we can with it. We are sending it forward for further consideration. And I also hope that, these conversations provide an opportunity to showcase what's being done, where we can further collaborate, where we can learn best practices and implement them within our own school authorities and our own schools. So I truly hope the conversations today have been beneficial to you and to your students. One thing that I probably sound like a broken record, but everything that we do here in my branch is we always put students first. What do our Francophone and our French immersion FSL students need in order to be the best version of themselves? So that is our primary goal here. And so again, the purpose of today was to have those conversations to hopefully help you help your students, and to have discussions on how we might be able to access additional federal funding to support you in making those ideas become reality. So if you do have any further comments, questions, concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are here. We do have an opportunity to submit applications to access this federal funding. The deadline is fast approaching though. I believe it is mid-December, December 17th, if I recall correctly. And of course, we will need some time internally to review them, not because we plan to make any changes, but we really like to increase collaboration. So if we see 2 applications come in where they're wanting to do the same thing, we're like, hey, maybe these 2 school authorities or schools may want to collaborate. So we'll reach out to you to see if that's possible. Because of course we want to get the biggest bang for the buck. There's not a lot of federal funding available, but there is some. So wherever we can collaborate and increase positive impact across Alberta, that is what our aim is. So again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns that you would like to add, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. If you would like to submit an application to access federal funding, please get a hold of us. You can contact me. Amy has just put up our shared email address. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And again, thank you all so very much for participating today. We do plan to have another discussion, perhaps later on in the spring, to just continue the conversation. You know, the pandemic changed a lot, some good, some bad, a lot of bad, but definitely some good. We do see some silver linings, such as, you know, the increase in the availability of virtual professional development to really assist those teachers in the more rural areas who may not have access to it. So again, we will take this information and we will have another conversation in the spring to see where we want to go with this, where we are able to go with this. So again, thank you so very much for your time today, and I hope you found it beneficial. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.